Everybody was able to get lunch. Hopefully that means nobody will fall asleep. But it's a real possibility. No, I'm kidding. It's going to be engaging and it's being recorded and streamed live. So just a few things before we do some introductions. First, I just want to say thanks to our panelists. I believe we have one on Zoom for being here. We'll get to introductions in a minute. This is the third workshop today focused on supporting business and workforce. We're having workshops all this week except yesterday. I'll touch on those in a little bit. This is being recorded and streamed live. So if you are going to speak, you have microphones in front of you. Please push the button so the red light turns green. So folks that are on Zoom or watching on YouTube can hear what you have to say. The second thing that I would say is for any branch member that is joining virtually, please drop any questions that you might have into the chat, and those will be shared with the panelists for discussion. And branch members that are here in person, you can pop your mic on and ask questions at any point as part of the conversation and the dialogue with the panelists going forward. So before we go any further, we'll do a quick introduction. So we'll start on Zoom. We have a panelist that's on Zoom to please give your name and organization, and then we'll move to in the room.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Fegan. I'm with the City of Bonita Springs. I am the senior planner for the city. But in the context of this meeting, I am also the staff liaison for the Historical Preservation Board. The city takes historical preservation and that portion of the city culture very seriously. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about it.
Great. Thank you. Is that the only one, Robbie? Great. All right. So we'll go to here.
Nancy McPhee with the Lee County Visitor and Convention Bureau, and I manage TDC funding for arts and culture organizations. And we, as a marketing organization for Lee County Tourism, we feel arts and culture is a big part of the story that we tell when we promote the destination.
Thank you.
My name is Nicole Perino. I am the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Bonita Springs. I am also the staff liaison to our city's Art and Public Places Board. So I do oversee a lot of their projects. Mostly they've done a lot of art in the sun projects and things like that in our downtown, but they are branching out throughout the city, as well as oversee the 6 artist cottages the city has that we rent to local artists.
Great. Thank you. Harrison, you want to do a quick intro?
I'm Harrison Newton with the Resilient Lee support team. I am also a person working for Haggerty Consulting. I lead our resilience portfolio.
Thanks, Harrison. And Tessa will introduce herself in a minute. And I just realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm John Romine. I'm part of the team here at Collaboratory, also part of the support team for the Recovery Task Force. So real quick, a high-level overview of what the Recovery Task Force is. So it is common practice after a disaster happens in a community. It's based on the FEMA framework. And this specific Recovery Task Force, it was authorized by the Board of County Commissioners. Commissioner Kevin Ruane is the chair for the task force, and the remaining 12 members make up the elected entities across Lee County as a geography. So the cities, the fire districts, the law enforcement, the school board, our health system, and then a legislative delegation and constitutional office. So that is what makes up the Recovery Task Force. This whole process is broken into 8 branches. So planning and capacity, which is looking at the higher level overarching policies that could change across the entire county. Economic recovery, which is a portion of the conversation today. Education and workforce, also a portion of the workshops today. Health and social services, infrastructure, housing, natural resources, and then obviously the topic we're having a conversation about right now, arts and culture, is cultural resources. Do we need to wait while it says preparing live stream? So we have been on a bit of an aggressive timeline beginning late February, early March, driving towards a December 5th Board of County Commission meeting where they will vote on the recovery and resiliency plan. We just wrapped up the community engagement portion of the session of the planning process, where we were really gathering information from the community. We'll touch on that in a minute. As well as the branches have had their monthly meetings, 3 monthly meetings, where they've been starting to identify what some of the initial priority areas are for this plan. So now we're in the solutions mode. So how do we start to develop this recovery and resilience plan that will ultimately be what goes back to the community late summer, early fall for final input, and then ultimately to the Board of County Commissioners in December. So we are in solutions mode and driving towards what are the things that would make Lee County more resilient. As it relates to community engagement, we hosted 17 town halls, 2 are virtual and 15 throughout the community. And the idea was really to have these in communities. So we used the Lee County planning communities to make sure that we were getting the voice from around the county and not just, you know, in one centralized location. Some of those town halls were also done in English and Spanish to make sure our entire community had opportunity to weigh in. We had about a little over 1,000 folks participated in the town halls. We still have the survey open on the website on resiliently.com, where people can still weigh in on what their priorities are for their community, for the county as a whole. And we're almost to 5,000 folks that have participated in that. And then on March 30th, we had a region-wide, so it included the other 4 counties in the 5-county region. On the table discussions, which were throughout the community on one day, people prioritizing what was important to them for problems to solve for our communities. And so we had about another 1,000 data points for that, starting to prioritize what we need to focus on in this plan. And so the workshops, as I shared, that's the focus of this week, other than yesterday. So Monday was all focused on critical infrastructure. Except power, that one has been rescheduled to June 21st. One of the key power partners was unable to attend on Monday. So that will be June 21st in the afternoon here at Collaboratory between 2 and 5 is the time frame that will be. An invitation will go out for that one. Today's all about supporting business and workforce. Tomorrow's about community resilience. Yeah, I got something in my eye. And then Friday is all about housing. So we will spend this week really starting to identify what are those initiatives or those solutions that will come out of these workshops. So again, not revisiting everything that happened as a result of the storm, but what are the solutions? And in this one specifically, what are the priority areas or the solutions or the projects, initiatives that could come out of that would focus on arts and culture. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tessa.
All right. Too many things in this. All right, welcome back. For those of you who have been with us for more than just this session, thank you to our panel for being here. Branch members, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and ask as we go. I just want to start by level setting a little bit, which is a little different than I've done in the other sessions. Because when we were out doing town halls, we heard from the community, like, we don't really fully understand what arts and culture has to do with having a resilient community going forward. And so I wondered if each of you could just take a minute to talk a little bit about your perspective on that.
So being that I'm in marketing for tourism, I can tell you that the majority of our visitors that come to the destination are coming for not only the beach, which isn't quite fully available, perhaps after a disaster, but they're coming for cultural experiences, and art is a big part of that, storytelling. So we rebranded a year ago, and we're focusing inward on inland experiences in Lee County. And I can tell you that to get a community back up and running from a business perspective, having arts and cultural organizations back online, presenting their programs, hosting events is very important, and businesses rely on them, right? For instance, Sanibel, many of the attractions like Bailey Matthews Shell Museum, Big Arts were affected, and there's not, as well as the beaches, so there's not many visitors going out there. So I think from an economic standpoint, it's very important to support them in any way we can.
So arts and culture provide another economic driver.
Absolutely.
Okay, Nicole?
Just to kind of piggyback off that, as the city, we have focused in our arts of placing different sculptures and murals and things like that throughout our downtown, which is something that the city is really focused on putting together bigger, better, walkable downtown with more businesses and things like that. And we do collaborate with the Centers of the Arts in Bonita Springs that does, they put on the National Art Festival every year in Riverside Park, which is in our downtown. So we do work with them, which brings thousands of people into our community from all over the country. It's not just local, because these artists come from all over. And to showcase their work, and that's a huge economic driver for us, for our businesses, for our hotels, for everything, to have these artists come into our downtown.
Yeah, so it's things to do, but then people do other things when they come, whether it's people who live here or it's people who are visiting. So it's a big economic driver. Mike, what would you like to add?
I think I would just stay on point with what's already been said about arts and culture being a huge economic driver. I think if you really want to assess the health of a city or a county, you have to look at its arts and culture programs and see the status of those, if they're thriving or if they're hurting. We saw a perfect example of that in 2008 with the economic downturn. And we saw it again a little bit in 2020 with COVID. So it's a fantastic indicator to understand the overall health of a city. So it's definitely something that plays an important role.
Great. Okay, so if we want our cities and our communities and our businesses to be healthy and thriving, we need to focus on how do we support a strong arts and culture sector. So with that, I'll ask my first, well, I guess now it's my second question. In the wake of, oh yeah,
Well, I
Fred.
wanted to add, I think, Nicole, don't we do that over 3 different weekends?
Yes.
Scattered through the season,
We
which is a big point.
We do. For the National Art Festival, we have 3 weekends. We do the first, typically it's the first weekend in January, February, and March.
okay.
So it's over 3 months during our season that we have thousands of people in our.
Yeah, so the businesses depend on that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so in the wake of the disaster, how do communities help their arts communities build back? And is there a need for a sector specific approach?
So I think that the communities that are most successful with art initiatives are those that have a public arts council, like the city of Fort Myers, I think Cape Coral, city of Bonita, and working together, I think that they would be the first point of contact for us to identify the need post-disaster, who's been affected. I know after the storm, the Tourist Development Council funds arts and attractions. And I reached out to every one of them within a week after the storm to get a status update on their operation. Since then, most all of them are open except those that have structural issues. So I think the having an umbrella organization could be the Alliance for the Arts from a county perspective, but each community, I think, does a pretty good job. There's smaller communities that perhaps could have a point person on arts, culture. I know there's the Historic Preservation Board. So I think working together to identify who those point people are is what I know would help our organization. And then Lee County also could perhaps appoint someone that oversees arts and culture and focus on capital improvements in addition to what my office does, which is primarily marketing.
Yep. So it sounds like maybe we do need to have a specific focus on the sector, and that can come in a collaborative approach with, appointed boards and councils, maybe a specific alliance of the arts, like the Alliance for the Arts. But that there does need to be a sector specific approach to arts and culture. Nicole, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We also did the same. Our artist cottages that we do have 6 of them, they all flooded with storm surge. So those artists were displaced for 6 months while we did the build back. They're back in them now. But, you know, to help out, we did, you know, assist as we could, as well as we partner again with the Centers of the Arts to see like how they could help and collaborate with the artists that we have there.
Yeah.
So we do rely on the Center of the Arts for assistance of our Art and Public Places Board. Our board also in our ordinance in the creation of the board, which was created in 2005, does state that a voting member be from the Center for the Arts. So we make sure we have that collaboration.
So Mike, thoughts on any, on how we can help support the arts community in building back?
Well, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it sounds like everybody's covering it. The sector specific approach really does seem to work. It's one of those things where, like Nicole said, in the city of Bonita, we take those aspects of the city very seriously. We have advisory boards made up of experts in those fields that are there to consult and help out. They are funded out of the city's budget for projects, you know, so for an example, using historic preservation as an example, we have a line item in the budget specifically for grants for the designated historic structures. So if one got damaged during the storm, which Nicole can talk to you about that, or if, you know, if one needs repairs or something like that, they can come to the Historic Preservation Board, lay out the types of repairs that they need, get it approved, go ahead and foot the bill up front, and then the city will reimburse them for those costs to kind of, you know, show their support. So yes, sector specific does seem to work, and yeah.
So is it fair to say that we need these organizing committees, collaboratives, organizations, so that we can make sure we're reaching the full community? And in doing that, I guess my next question would be, how do we, is there something that you can think of or that you thought of in the process since Hurricane Ian that could help increase the uptake of resources that are available to the arts and culture community? How do we engage them better so that they can get back up and running?
I think what we observed after Ian was a lot of pivoting by arts organizations. For instance, the Fort Myers Beach Art Association lost their building. So they right away collaborated with the Alliance for the Arts and went online. They did their famous artist workshops. They had virtual galleries where you could see what artists had what available. And a lot of that went on. A lot of our performing arts organizations like Broadway Palm were feeding stations or hosted other businesses like Bubble Room selling cake out of the back of their building. So I think a lot of pivoting occurred after Ian, and I think that was a win for both the hosting organization, whether it was arts focused or not, and allowing other businesses to continue and promote their programs, you know.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mike next. Mike, do you have anything you'd like
Sure.
to add?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think it's not so much a resource of the municipality or the county, but it's a way you can help those affected spend their resources better. One of the things that we do in the city is we have certain exemptions built in for permitting and in the land development code for structures that may have been affected by a disaster, or historic structures that may have been damaged or that need help, and, you know, things like that. So if you find ways to make it a bit easier for those who are affected to spend their resources, we see that as being a pretty significant help as well. And that doesn't cost the city any money, really. That's just, you know, a few keystrokes to change the code and to make it workable for those who are actually affected. We actually see that as probably one of the biggest benefits of the way our system is set up in the city.
Okay, that's a really good point. Nicole, do you have anything else to add?
On our end, really that's for the city of Bonita Springs. It's going to be what Mike said and his department and what they've done.
Yeah.
Than necessarily the city doing something specific.
So are there other other ideas about policies that could be changed or improved that could support the arts and culture community in a more, to be more efficient and able to get either started back up or to get started in the first place?
Well, I can tell you right now, there isn't a mechanism for capital improvements for specifically for arts through the funding source that we manage. However, it is an eligible expense in the state statute for the use of tourist tax revenue. So not to say you couldn't go to the Board of County Commissioners and request assistance with fixing, you know, a building that's open to the public and hosting arts programs. But I hear from all the arts groups that get marketing dollars from us is what they really need is capital help with capital improvements. So I don't know if there's a way to, similar to the arts program, similar to the beach and shoreline program for TDC, that's just one funnel of money. There's probably others that could be considered. And I'm speaking, and I'm pointing at Lee County, which there could be other, again, philanthropic organizations out there that could be a source for capital improvements as well.
Yeah, so we're really trying to think about, our branch members are interested in understanding how do they come up with like the best viable priorities as funding does stream back into the community to support the arts and culture community. So this idea of capital improvements, I mean, obviously after a storm, we need capital improvements. But also in general, right? Because it sounds like the TDC is trying to market a more robust set of resources for people to come visit here.
Right.
And arts and culture plays a big role in that. So capital improvements are definitely on the list of things that are currently underfunded and probably fairly decent need right now. Anything else?
Not off the top of my head.
Nicole?
Just on our end with the city, we are big in private public partnerships. So for us, you know, if development comes in, if they have space for public art, or if, you know, they would like, we typically do when we do our mural program, we reach out to local businesses and, you know, we could say, hey, would you like a private public partnership where, you know, we could split the cost or something like that within our Art and Public Places Board budget. And, you know, that would get more murals in our city, more sculptures in new developments. So that, of course, that would put more artists to work as well.
Yeah. Okay. Harrison, did you say we have another panel member?
Yes, we do. We have Roxana Barbara from Miami-Dade involved in their cultural affairs department. And so maybe we can have her introduce herself and
That would be
get into
great.
the conversation.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, hi, how are you? I'm sorry for joining a little late the meeting. My name is Roxana Barber. I work for the Cultural Affairs Department as Grants Administrator. I mainly manage grant programs for arts organizations that are based in Miami-Dade County, and also a grant program that supports professional development for artists also based in Miami-Dade County.
Fantastic. We're so glad that you were able to make it. So we were just talking about ways that we can more quickly support and help our arts and culture sector after the disaster of Hurricane Ian, but also in general. So do you have any examples of ways that you all have taken a sector specific approach to supporting arts and culture in Miami-Dade?
Yes, well, through the pandemic, we were able to do a couple of things. Well, first of all, we try to exercise as much flexibility with the ongoing grants that we're offering to cultural arts organizations, meaning that we pretty much told them up until now, which is when the pandemic started, you know, we can consider your grant to be fulfilled. And then we also provided extensions so that they would have more time to complete their programs, and also virtual adaptations when they chose to do so. Through the pandemic, we're also able to assist financially some arts organizations through a program called MASS, and that was very meaningful and significant for organizations because it helped them to get through the difficult time. And last year, we began with funding originally from the National Endowment for the Arts. We began a grant program for individual artists so that money can go to them directly. And that also was something that we thought that, you know, we were positioned at the right time. The need had been there for a really long time, obviously, but we were able to get the support from the NEA, and this year the county mayor and commissioners are supporting the program by allowing, you know, our budget to sustain the program. So we are now able to continue this commitment to individual artists. The grant request this year was up until $10,000. We're in the process of announcing grant award results. And I can tell you, I believe from the last round, we received over 500 applications from artists. So like I said, the need has been there for a long time, but we're happy that now we can meaningfully and directly support artists by awarding them based on the work they are doing. We're not asking for anything extra. We're not asking for a project to be proposed. We simply ask them to describe what their practice will look like within the grant year, meaning if they're a visual artist, they can include the number of exhibitions that they have, their studio work, their research. If they're a performing artist, they can also detail performance opportunities and whatnot. So it's the grant has been really created to support the work that they have already been doing, and also in Miami-Dade County, things, and I know that it's not only Miami-Dade County, but the cost of real estate has greatly impacted almost every individual here. So as inflation continues, this is something that we feel that we're happy to be able to finally do.
Okay, thank you so much. That's great. So this idea of being flexible around funding is really important, and recognizing the need to actually support artists is extremely important. And along those lines, whomever from the panel wishes to respond, I'm curious if there are other things that we've seen elsewhere or that we're working on now in small pockets that could help artists, whether, after the myriad of problems that they've faced, that we've all faced, but specifically to artists, recognizing some of the unique challenges that they may face because of the sector that they're in, that we could actually maybe consider as opportunities for us here in Lee County.
I think collaborating with other small businesses or events in the area is important. I know after Ian, we had artists on Pine Island, many of them live out there, work with area businesses to get murals up on the wall of that restaurant. So it not only gave the artist a stipend, but it gave the business a way to generate interest in people coming to their restaurants. So I think if we could, and we are trying at my office to do that, to stimulate more experiences that bring businesses together with artists or storytellers, tell the historical story of a specific community. So we are trying to do that. And I think that in small pockets, it is beneficial to for-profit businesses to work with artists.
That's great. Jim?
Hi, my name is Jim Magnus. I'm on the Economic Recovery Branch and from Bonita Springs. I think my thought is more towards Fred Forbes and towards Nicole and Mike Fegan. As far as an idea, it seems to me as though downtown Bonita Springs has got an incredible opportunity. They've spent a lot of money on redoing the roads. They've got the new library, which kind of fits in with the arts and all of that as well. They also have some, downtown Bonita Springs is not like a downtown Fort Myers where you have all the old buildings and things like that. And Bonita Springs does have the Lyles Hotel. It has the Good Bread building that it moved over onto that same property. It has the artist cottages as well. But I just wonder if there isn't something that really needs to be done to reimagine that area because of the fact that you have a lot of development that's coming downtown. You have, like you talked about, a national organization that comes to do art shows 3 times a year. And the Bonita Springs City Council just approved them for a 5-year contract. So they'll be coming for some time. I think that's a great advantage, but I think there needs to be something done to reimagine that area with the Artist Cottage, the Good Bread building, and the Lyles Hotel, because you could keep some of the history there, and yet you could still do something with the arts to do something. It's like a food truck park. Everything that's in a food truck park isn't going to be a taco, or everything isn't going to be a pizza shop. It's going to be all different things. And I kind of envision that maybe the Lyles Hotel, the Good Bread building, could be somehow and maybe collaborated with the Center for the Arts and collaborate with the university to try to bring it into something. You have, 6 artist cottages there now. That's not a big enough mass or a big enough amount to really make anything happen. And I think that there's lots more smarter people out there than I am that could maybe figure out what kind of a mass you needed to be able to do that. The Lyles Hotel is empty now because of the flood. And the Good Bread building is empty as well. So now might be the time to reimagine that. And maybe it means reimagining those artist cottages as well. Maybe it means artists living up above and some artists down below, and getting some full support from a university that obviously it's an important part of their curriculum as well. But, my initiative, I guess, is that I think that would be something that would bring more traffic, more people, more tourism, to the tourism of Bonita Springs as well.
It sounds like you're talking about also like creating a greater intensity of the arts and the opportunities that creates as part of this.
I do. I think that you could go and, because, you're not, this way you can go and you can have, somebody that does leather, somebody that does glass blowing, somebody that does oil, somebody that does, watercolor, somebody that, and I don't know all the other type of art things that are out there, but if you could do it so that you had it so that people want to go there. Quite frankly, it's not been my opinion that anybody goes to the artist cottages. The hours are not posted that are normally open. Some of them are open, some of them aren't open. It's not a real, right now, it's not something, it needs math.
You need like a concentration.
You need a concentration and you need something to kind of get that thing off. And I do believe that if you could get the Center for the Arts, they've got a new director, and with Mike on the historical side of it to do the preservation for the hotel and the Good Bread building, and maybe it means just reimagining that whole area and doing some further development to make that a hub where people want to go because there's arts there.
Okay. Any response, Nicole or Mike?
Sure. The Lyles Hotel, it does have a current lease with the Historical Society. Once we do build that back, I am working with our insurance company and FEMA and getting those built back, as well as with Mike and the Historic Preservation Board. Because during build back, we do have to use specific materials and things like that to build it back to keep that historical or integrity. So we have been working with Mike on that, as well as the Wonder Gardens. We've been working on building those facilities back as well. But those are things that I believe council will be talking about once we do get the Lyles Hotel built back, as to what exactly are they going to do with it? Because it did formerly house our neighborhood services. They have been displaced to a different building in the old library. So I do know that council is looking at different options on what they're going to do with that facility. I haven't heard anyone mention arts, so it's good that you mentioned it. So that could be of topic. But again, the Historical Society, the Bonita Springs Historical Society does have a current lease, and did do tours and walkthroughs. They had an historical bedroom that was in the Lyles Hotel, as well as different pieces of artwork that was all around the hotel on the walls. We did save most of that from the storm surge flooding of the Lyles Hotel. Luckily, a lot of their library was upstairs, so that didn't get affected. We had 2 feet of water in the downstairs, so that was the major part that was affected. But yeah, those are things that we could definitely look at, as well as we did have DPZ come in and look at the former community hall property, which is right across the street from Riverside Park, and look at doing different things in that area, and to make that, bring more people downtown as well, and help connect Riverside Park to the new library. So there isn't just this open space in between right now, that it would be more collaborative, and you could connect through both of those. And that would actually help our art festivals as well, to have more room, have more space, and they could have more vendors throughout that whole property. So those are things that the city is looking at. We're just trying to get built back at this point.
Okay. All right, so we have another panelist on Zoom.
Yes, we have, we're honored, in addition to our panelists here, to be joined by Gordon Knox, who is a longtime cultural leader in San Francisco, and has done many different roles. And I would just give him the moment to introduce himself. Thank you, Gordon.
Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to be with you, and it's really exciting to be envisioning the reconstruction of the region post the trauma of Ian. And I'm super excited to hear that the role of the arts are being considered as part of the sort of the engine and the process of rebirth and relife in the post hurricane setting. I've been involved in working with the arts for 30 some years. My first program was in Italy, but I ended up with a major residency program that I built in the South Bay, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Then went on to Stanford, where I was building artist-led programs to transform cities like Rijeka in Croatia, a Danish island, a high school program in Greenland, a national program in Brazil, and then on to the Arizona State University Art Museum, where I was the director for 6 years, and I was working there to build community programs that were art-based, but also very much revitalizing downtown Phoenix. In fact, we built a residency program in downtown Phoenix, and it was more successful than we wanted, in fact, because within 5 years, the region suddenly filled up with artists, and the real estate value went up, that they sold the building out from under us. But this is just an example of how the presence of artists and the community that's created by artists is truly, revitalizing of cities and urban centers, and even abandoned or underutilized sort of neighboring neighborhoods. And I think the opportunity here is very, very rich. I think the idea that you could have artists involved, both in terms of the sort of kiosks, the small shops selling their work and attracting tourists, which is a a very powerful magnet for tourists. I mean, leather work or art pieces or glass work is often something that people look for as they walk through a downtown area as a tourist, but also in terms of community, in terms of actually building a go-to purpose to come to that region and have a critical mass of artists brought in for a longer stay in the residency sort of model, which could be for months or even years. And the effect of having a revitalized downtown that is attractive to artists coming to set up and create their lives is, within a matter of 4 or 5 years, transformative to neighborhoods or cities. I mean, Berlin is a great example. When the Berlin was part of East Germany, the CIA and the Ford Foundation got together and said the one thing that will save the city is putting artists in there. And for the entire period of the Cold War, they used Berlin as a place for artists to live and work and develop their lives. And then when the wall came down, Berlin is today probably the most desirable city in Europe for art. And that's just, I mean, you can look at Williamsburg, Soho in New York, Detroit. There are, you know, a number of examples where the role of artists is actually a role of municipal uplift and community building. So I'm very happy to be here with you, and I'm super excited by the ideas that have already come up. So thank you.
Gordon, you have sold us on this idea. And so I would like to ask you, where would we start? What do we need to do to get rolling on this? We want to be the greatest art place in the United States.
Well, I think we sit down and start looking sort of a little bit from a city planning standpoint, sort of what is possible, what is the building stock, the possibilities, the capacities to identify sort of neighborhoods, warehouses and so forth. And then to work with local, I mean, the local universities are great. Captiva is a great tradition of art nearby. The Rauschenberg Foundation, there are others that we could look to. And there are a number of arts organizations throughout the country who would be willing to step up and support the idea of a residency program. So I think the first step is to see what's possible, what really is realistic in terms of the scale and scope of the housing and studio infrastructure. And then we put together a vision and a sort of a outline of how this would work and a sort of social cultural statement of what's intended. And then we find some sort of well-recognized institutional partners who bring in you know, recognition and history. I mean, it could be the Warhol Foundation, it could be the Rauschenberg Foundation, it could be the NEA, it could be a number of different institutions that sort of speak clearly to the power of a significant contribution to the arts ecology. And then I think with that in place, we actually are able to utilize reconstruction funding to build that center. It's actually can be put together in a outline fairly simply and fairly clearly. And I have done that a number of places, and it's interesting how similar they are and how effective they are. Of course, each context is different. Each city has its own infrastructure, funding capacity, you know, history and traditions. But I think we could sit down very quickly and put together a model and a vision and put that forward as a primary goal.
Yeah, I love this idea that you have done it enough that you can see that it's replicable across places. And so it sounds like this is something we could potentially prioritize as an initiative. And we do have the Rauschenberg Foundation right here as well, which is an asset in this idea. So Gordon, we were also talking before you came on about, what are some of the things that we might need to be thinking about to support artists after this disaster? A lot of folks lost housing, things, inflation is going up and artists are being affected just like everyone else. But we've already talked about the fact that we need a sector specific approach when it comes to arts and culture. Do you have any thoughts or examples of things that you've seen elsewhere after a disaster that is specifically helpful to support artists?
Well, there are obviously a number of examples, and I think Katrina has a few. Mel Chin, who is a fantastic artist, came down from New York and started to work on restructuring the artist ecology in New Orleans after that crisis. And even was it Andrew? I can't remember. Came swept through New York, downtown New York, flooded. And there were a number of institutions or organizations. And the first step in that has often been to address studio replacement. And one of the things that I've seen very successful is if there is a warehouse or a large structure that could be sort of repurposed into a series of studios that are dry, safe, and comfortable for artists to work in, it sort of shows the city's sincerity in trying to recreate the infrastructure required for the art production that takes place by the artists. Of course, they probably had losses with regards to their housing and schooling and all sorts of other things. But in terms of the art side, if there is a way, I mean, if the city were to say, look, here is a warehouse, a building, a place, and we are purposely setting this up to be studios for practicing artists in the region who have been affected by the weather. That's a great statement, and that's actually a wonderful way to introduce the sincerity of a commitment to the arts to the outside world as you begin to actually build further infrastructure for sort of arts-oriented restructuring and rebuilding. But yeah, I'd say a studio space would be a great thing to start looking for.
Great. Okay. So this is really important, this idea, like if this is something that's important to our community, if it's important to our economy and our tourism, but also to the people who live and work here. I mean, I know my kids go to arts camp, it's part of workforce development and everything else. Then this idea of making commitments like this to finding ways to accommodate in the in-between, right? Because it takes a while to build back. And so what do we do instead? What's our commitment to the arts? Anything else on this specific topic of supporting artists from the panel online or here? Things that you've seen elsewhere that we should be considering? Okay. So we've seen the pandemic and also now this hurricane, and when we face disasters, trends in public spending and patronization of the arts shifts. So how can institutions be better supported, not only from physical damage to infrastructure, but also in terms of long-term economic recovery, economic impacts when it comes to arts and culture?
So I think from what I saw after Ian, some of the performing arts organizations as well as museums transition to assist in recovery via feeding sites, perhaps. And I think that I've heard some of them say if they could be involved earlier on in the planning process for a disaster, so that they would know what they're expected to participate and contribute to, if there's incentives for them to improve infrastructure at their own facility, for instance, like IMAG, if there's something specific that they could do to their campus that would then benefit us after a disaster, from being a shelter or a feeding location or distribution point. I think that they we're interested in being part of that conversation moving forward in the future.
Okay, so this idea of prioritizing our arts and culture community as part of our resilience and including them before we have a disaster. So this idea of what key structures and facilities exist? Do we need to invest in potentially upgrading them? What role and supports could we provide given the amount of downtime that we have from people patronizing the arts after some sort of disaster or during a pandemic when you're not able to go? What can we do to utilize those organizations in another way? Because the community already is patronizing them and from, during normal times. I don't know what normal is anymore, but then after a disaster, it makes sense that they could be part of the solution to get us back on our feet. So anybody have any examples or thoughts on like what it would take to do that, or what we should be thinking about in terms of that? Gordon, have you seen anything like that elsewhere? Or Roxana in Miami-Dade, do you all use your partners that way?
Well, I've seen partnerships in the cultural sector are often, it's interesting because there is sometimes a sort of a basic, in the normal stage, there's often a fair bit of competition. But as soon as disasters strike, it's remarkable to see how across the board there is a unified sort of desire to figure out how to revitalize and return to health the arts ecology of the region or the city or this town. And so I think reaching out and being able to provide a go-to place for these different organizations, a sort of a forum for a open discussion about how they can each contribute to sort of the resurgence of a healthy arts ecology might be a really good starting place, because then you'll hear from them what is needed and what's required. But also, more than anything, you provide a forum or a venue for them to come in, and so another recognition that the city and the region is serious about the arts and the artist community and its health and its restructuring. So I'd say a good starting point would be to organize a bit of a convening of some of these organizations and explore what's immediately needed. At the same time, I think we can look at what resources are available and how we might be able to provide models that would be offered as potential solutions to some of the problems.
Great. So I've heard you say twice now, and I think we need to acknowledge it. I didn't acknowledge it the first time. I will this time, that we need to engage artists themselves to really understand, and the organizations themselves to really understand what they would need to be part of the solution.
Exactly right.
Hi, my name is Janelle Trull. I'm the executive director of the Cape Coral Museum of History, and we have had discussions about this. I'm on the cultural resources branch, but we've had discussions of this amongst our branch members, and part of it really is just, to Nancy's point, having something in place before the storm.
Yeah.
So we know that there are different organizations that always come in. You know that LCEC is going to have a bunch of trucks that come in from outside. So where do they store those trucks? What do they do with the debris? Where do they do? And a lot of times cultural resources are on parks or large, grounds. So maybe it's having something in place where in times of emergency, you're going to be borrowing their parking lot for X amount of time and they're going to pay you X amount of dollars for that. So it's just really thinking beforehand, how do we utilize all of these spaces, and then realizing that there's some way we have to be able to accommodate these organizations because they're nonprofits. They have limited resources themselves. They may have had damage. They may have these other things. They have small staffs. There's burnout. It's been years of craziness. We all know this. So really, it's just pre-planning and making sure that they're part of the conversation, and having a seat at the table would make a very, very big difference at this point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because it's a win-win, right? I mean, we have these organizations that can't operate business because of the nature of the situation, and we have a need, right, to manage the logistics after a storm and all of the things. And so I think this idea has been one that's been bubbling up. It even came up in the infrastructure branch about how do we use our nonprofits, arts and culture organizations in a much more proactive way as part of pre-planning, and creating a really much more robust form of communication around how we prepare for that. Thank you for that. Roxana, how, do you have anything that you would like to add to this conversation about how these organizations can play a role, or how we can help support them for long-term, economic stability, given all sort of the ups and downs that we've had because of the pandemic and storms and everything else?
Everything that was said around the pre-planning and the pre and post storm planning is something that Miami-Dade County has gradually adopted and has also benefited from these type of convenings that were mentioned as well, where we sat with organizations, small, mid-sized, large organizations, and went through their needs and started identifying resources that could be helpful. So sort of acted as a liaison between larger organizations and smaller organizations, and also between county resources and other private resources that perhaps could be of help. In terms of long-term sustainability, I mean, as a grants person, I greatly believe in the commitment to supporting artists and organizations through robust grant programs, reliable grant programs that are carefully designed and thought through. But it's not only, but that's not it. I mean, residency programs have also been mentioned, and they can be very meaningful in terms of connecting artists with businesses, with institutions, and also helping with preservation and with tourism and with all the things that have been discussed. I mean, what's beautiful to see is when large institutions are, when they introduce programs for artists that advance the mission of their cultural history, but at the same time involve the voices of new artists in a way that brings the community together, both public and private, and that goes back into the past, perhaps to talk about history, but also carves a path towards the future. So, I have been very excited to see residency programs that have been introduced by local organizations that are greatly surprised by the work that is done by artists, and then the product of those residencies at times are then developed further into ongoing programming. So the more that artists can be involved through through jury selections, through proposals that then are carefully deliberated on to advance organizations' missions or institutions' missions that can support their work. I think, things come up that are not carefully planned or even expected, that that are able to advance the work in very meaningful ways as well.
Thank you so much. All right. Any other questions from the branch right now? Okay, so last question. The Cultural Resources Branch has indicated that that Lee County has a vested interest in growing a more robust arts community. What is the future of arts and culture in Lee County, and how can the region push the community to the next level to increase our national notoriety? So I really want to think about right now, like thinking past the storm. What are some things that we could potentially do, or that you thought of, that would really push our arts and culture reputation to the next level here in Lee County?
I mean, for the city of Bonita Springs, we are excited for the Centers of the Arts having a new executive director and working with her. Because she has the experience of working in different places around the country and doing art. As well as in Europe. So she is from Russia. So we are excited to what her ideas are. She does have a lot of ideas. And luckily for us, the Centers of the Arts has been great at putting the National Art Festival in our city and in our downtown. To give us that national recognition for the arts. But I do know that she has even more robust ideas for that and wants to collaborate more with the city. I haven't spoken with her about outside of that and into Lee County but I'm sure that's something she would be willing to do.
Yeah. So on that note,
Mhm.
I think if you don't mind, we
Sure.
have this link where people can submit initiatives. And so maybe you share that with her
Yes.
if she has something that she would like to submit that could help take the arts and culture community here to the next level. And it, Bonita, we consider Bonita part of Lee County. So
Yes,
when
it
I say
is.
Lee County, I mean everything, not the political sort of jurisdiction. Unincorporated Lee County too. I mean, incorporated Lee County, sorry. All right, Mike, anything else that you want to add on that from your perspective? What's something that you've maybe seen or thought of that could really push us to the next level?
Well, I think it was actually something that was touched on earlier on in the conversation by Jim with regards to partnerships with the universities and schools in the area. I've been in Lee County for most of my life. And one of the things that I always wrestled with was whether or not to stay because there really wasn't a whole heck of a lot for young people to do. And one of the things that I see quite clearly is that young people, especially those in high school and college, are very interested in culture. They're very interested in arts. These are things that they gravitate towards. So if you can kind of get them when they're still in that mindset, the interest expands from there. So I think partnering with universities and other schools in the areas is probably something that's underutilized in a lot of areas, not just in arts and culture and historic preservation. And I think that'd be a great starting point for any jurisdiction.
Great, thank you. Nancy?
So I think again, back to all of these arts councils, we promote Lee County, but we rely on the communities to deliver, right? So getting all of them together and what's the next big idea, right? I think back to some of the more memorable ones that did gain us national attention. The time we sunk a Coast Guard cutter and then put artwork on it and it hung there for 3 months. Not only did it bring in scuba divers, but then we pulled the artwork up and it moved around the region in galleries. And it just blew me away, the exposure that got. Art of the Olympians, some of you may remember that. It wasn't sustainable, but when it started and the whole idea of retired Olympic athletes who now are artists hanging their artwork in that gallery, it brought us a lot of exposure. So what's sustainable, what's going to stick around for a while? We don't have exhibit space big enough to host things like a Starry Night. We had somebody that wanted to bring that exhibit in, had to have space for 3 months, in certain size, right? So perhaps, whatever they're going to do with the Civic Center, perhaps there could be a component where there could be gallery space for bringing in these bigger exhibits. Some of us went to the International Folk Art Market years ago to explore the possibility of bringing something of that magnitude in every once in a while. And I think that there's potential, but we need, again, a group of experts that are doing this on a daily basis, even the performing arts group, to collaborate and come up with that next big idea. And it could be a facility that could host things like this. We love the working artist studio type experience. I think immersive experiences are what we've identified as things that need to be developed for people to come. We've got loyal followers to Lee County. They love to come to Lee County. beaches is the number one reason most of them come. However, I know that there's things happening that we can turn into experiences that Airbnb would love to promote for us. And I think, again, we're going to rely on those arts councils and the Alliance for the Arts, and we're going to need to get them together to come up with that next big idea. And we can push it out, we can get the exposure, but there needs to be a sustainable conversation around anything like that.
So it sounds like jeez. I'm gonna lose my words. Okay, so this is gonna happen now. This is gonna be the new trend. I'm just gonna make words up. In addition to a sustained programming, we need a sustained commitment. Like there has to be an intentional commitment, it sounds like, to prioritizing arts and culture. We can market all day long, but we have to have things to market. And there has to be time enough for the uptake on those things. And so maybe if we pursue sort of that inventory around where we could put the residence programs or whatever, we should also maybe be thinking about how can we find space or repurpose space that could help us capture some of these opportunities that we're missing because we haven't necessarily made this a priority. So I think that that's sort of what I'm hearing under the conversation here. So Gordon, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so have you ever been to Southwest Florida?
Yeah, I was down in there for the Edison Prize, Edison
Oh,
Award, not too long ago. in
fantastic.
April.
All
And I
right,
just-
so what do
Yeah.
you think is something that we should be prioritizing beyond what you've already told us? Do you have any other ideas of what could take us to the next level?
Well, yes, I think that if there's a real commitment to make this happen, I mean, the idea of having even seasonal locations for performing arts groups to be able to rehearse and perform and present, because performing arts groups really need a space to work, and then they need time to be able to develop their work. So I could imagine assembling a set of facilities that would be ideal for sort of pre-Broadway or Twin Cities performances, or opportunities for workshopping popular performance arts programs where you can actually provide the facilities for 15 or 20 people to be working together over a 6-week period with a stage that can also include the public at certain moments. Things like that, becoming an engine and accelerator and a workshop for the creative output is an excellent way to get yourself known within the arts world. And when the artists are talking about locations as key places, as key support locations for the creative process, you suddenly create a buzz that is sort of unsuppressible. And if you add to that the potential for new housing, for sort of welcoming artists in to become part of the community, and that there is a little bit of a center of gravity, those two things and that sort of movement, I think you'd be surprised how quickly it becomes a destination for artists and creatives. And frankly, the entire movement towards the creative class, the whole group of people who are actually thinking in terms of video games, in terms of virtual realities, even some of the far-fetched and wonderful marketing programming that's coming out now. All of that creative practice is something that can be supported by a community when the community invests in artists on a sort of sustainable long-term level. So I honestly think we could sit down and look at the opportunities facing Lee County right now and come up with a plan of 3 or 4 different significant moves that would set the county up to be the next new incubator for arts for the country.
Do you have plans to come back again?
I would be happy to come back. Yeah, I will certainly be there next April, but because I'm involved with the Latimer Fellows program at the Edison Awards. But yeah, I'd be happy to come back and think about it, because I think it's a really exciting moment. And I think reorganizing urban and the smaller cities in this country as arts and creative practice centers is probably the greatest opportunity for a true sort of renaissance of those regions. I'd love to experiment with that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gordon. Harrison, we have a question in the chat.
Yes, we do. So do any of the panel members have recommendations or examples for saving historical and cultural buildings before and after the storm? How can we rally for restoration instead of demolition? We are facing this in Cape Coral surrounding the Cape Coral Yacht Club Ballroom, one of the only mid-century historical buildings in the Cape. The physical building holding the heart of cultural and civic activities built to bring folks to Cape Coral currently being proposed for demolition due to cost to repair, restore as a result of the FEMA rule.
I think that's a hard question. I'm not sure we have an answer to that.
No, but I might raise the historical preservation piece just to maybe lean on Mike's experience on whether there's.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of a tricky one to navigate. I know that sort of by implication in the Florida Building Code, there's some exemptions for historical structures. And we have certain exemptions as a result of that in our floodplain ordinance that is designed to help out the structure sort of work with some of the FEMA restrictions in a more meaningful way. So it's a combination of that and the fact that we also have grant funding that's available for our historic structures to help build back and preserve and repair. And we also have a designated staff person who is the city's floodplain coordinator, who is able to work with these individual businesses to sort of prioritize a list of needs when it comes to repair. So a lot of times with the FEMA stuff, it's one of those things where you don't need everything at once. There is a way to baby step certain improvements. And, you know, just to kind of give you an example, there are certain repairs that sort of play into that overall 5-year rule for FEMA. But there are also certain repairs that come off the books after a year or 2 years, like roofs, windows, doors, things like that. So there's a way to sort of baby step the repair process so that it works well, but it's an incredibly difficult and taxing thing to undertake. So I'm sort of giving you just a really high, 30,000 foot answer to that, but I don't think there really is a perfect solution for every jurisdiction. It's a lot of trial and error.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, Fred?
Yeah, there's some other ways I would be happy to talk to him by phone. So you can get a hold of them and they'll give you my number. Well, 614-975-3606. The other thing I thought of, and Nicole can react to this and so can Mike. We've got a building that was built in Bonita Springs, it opened 2016. The big theater on the corner, nightclub theater, and it went belly up. Probably been closed at least 6 years anyway, maybe 7. So that means that whoever's got the mortgage on it, you could make a dealing, but it's got stage, good acoustics. It's got some inside bars and beverage places and food places and all that. That would be one of these places that you could
Repurpose.
develop something for the emerging artists to come in and practice and then have performances.
Great. Okay, any questions? Thank you for that. Any questions from the branch members? No? Any questions from the public? Oh, okay, so I want to, sorry, I need the QR code. Thank you. All right, so if you have suggestions for initiatives based on this conversation today or otherwise, you can visit the link at this QR code and you can submit your initiative for us to consider on all arts and culture. And we are, excited to receive those. So if you have experience elsewhere or you want to share that with folks that you think might have some ideas, we'd be happy to hear them. And so since we have no public comment and no other questions, I'm going to thank our panel, thank our panel on Zoom. We can give them a round of applause. We really appreciate you and everything you're doing. We're grateful for you. And thanks to our panelists who are visiting from elsewhere via Zoom. We're very, very grateful for your outside expertise. And I hope everybody has a great afternoon.